There have been three god antagonists in One Piece: Enel, the god of Skypiea, Doflamingo, the god of Dressrosa, and Imu, the god of the world. Enel believed himself to be a divine being, Doflamingo as a celestial dragon believed himself to be a divine being, and Imu as the king of the celestial dragons certainly acts as a god, as is reflected in the manner in which he passes down judgment on the citizens of the world below him. And the most notable common thread between each of these three gods in One Piece is their devoted group of core subordinates that carry out their commands. Enel had the priests, Doflamingo had his seats, and Imu has the Gorosei. The visual parallels are clear and deliberate, with each of the gods presented to us with their core devout subordinates bowing before them in three nearly identical spreads. So with this in mind, we can actually look back at the stories of Enel's priests and Doflamingo's seats to see a remarkable parallel in how their narratives play out, that the Gorosei are actually already mirroring, to the point that we can actually predict not only when each of the Gorosei will lose, but who they will be defeated by, and even a potential major betrayal by one of the members. So strap in, because this video will break down the future of the Gorosei, the most mysterious group in One Piece, using clear parallels to the past that are already beginning to repeat. So the biggest commonality that Enel, Doflamingo, and Imu share is that they all rely on one unique power-up. That power-up is none other than Factor, the sponsor for this video. Factor is introducing Lunch to Go. These are wholesome lunches like grain bowls that are cooked by professional chefs, sent directly to you. I bet a lot of you don't even have time for lunch, let alone making sure that you're eating healthy meals. You could have nutritious lunches ready to go with Factor. No more meal prep, no more having to get takeout. Factor will hand you ready-to-go lunches that taste really good and are legitimately good for you, so you don't have to worry about calories or nutrition. It's actually so easy for you. All you have to do is go to their site, select the meals you want, and you're done. Fresh, pre-prepared meals will start being sent to your door, however often you want. I personally have a really hectic work life, so for me, taking all the thought out of what meals to eat and just being handed ready-to-go, healthy food that tastes good has been a huge time saver and general stress relief. So if you want to just check out what meals you could be eating, then head to factor75.com or just click the link below. If you like what you see, then use code MORGE50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. That's factor75.com or the link in the description below. So that aside, to begin with, let me give a quick refresher of how Skypiea, Dressrosa, and the final saga are all connected, and how Enel, Doflamingo, and Imu are all evolutions of one another. This is already explained in depth in this video, but let me give a brief rundown here. The Skypiea arc foreshadows the history of the One Piece world, centering around a will that has been passed down over centuries to relight the fire, aka bring the dawn, that can only be accomplished by overthrowing the evil dictatorial god that rules the realm, even concluding with a great treasure being found. It is beat for beat, foreshadowing the lore of the One Piece world at large. Now Dressrosa isn't even foreshadowing, it is straight up spelled out for us that it is very explicitly meant to directly represent the state of the larger One Piece world in general. Doflamingo's rule is explicitly meant to parallel the world government's rule, where he makes most citizens believe that they live under a just government in a utopia, when in actuality the government erases all who disobey from history and masks the truth of the dystopia, with Doflamingo himself representing how all celestial dragons rule the world, believing himself to be God who is destined to rule and manipulate mere mortals. And finally, in the final saga that we are in, we are no longer dealing with foreshadowing or metaphors, we are dealing with the truth of the broader world itself that the past arcs of Skypiea and Dressrosa already represented in miniature. We are dealing with Imu, the god of the world who makes those who disobey disappear from history, and who rules over a dystopic world. And there is a long-running will that has been passed down through centuries to defeat the god Imu and bring the dawn. These are all the broad strokes, clear story parallels between the three storylines. But what's crazy is that even if you get down to the nitty-gritty details of Skypiea, Dressrosa, and the final saga, you see that it's remarkably similar beats and character archetypes playing out over and over. Both Skypiea and Dressrosa concluded with Enel and Doflamingo respectively beginning a great cleansing, with Enel wiping out Skypiea itself and aiming to wipe out most of its inhabitants, and Doflamingo attempting to do the same with the birdcage. And they both parallel each other to the point that they both literally go about it in the exact same way by launching a great survival game to see who is allowed to survive their cleansing. In the final saga, the upcoming Great Cleansing has already been established and hinted at as coming around the corner. Oda is really deliberately drawing on the same beats for all three storylines. We also see the painfully specific similarity of the Straw Hats arriving at Skypiea the day that a great rebellion against God is about to take place to take back the land, and the Straw Hats arrive in Dressrosa the day that a great rebellion against God is about to take place to take back the land, with Viper leading the Shandians in Skypiea against Enel, and Kiros leading the Tontatas in Dressrosa against Doflamingo. And would you look at that, in this final saga that we have been building up to this entire time, the conflict that is just now finally starting is Dragon leading the Revolutionary Army against Emu and the Celestial Dragons to take back the world. Skypiea, Dressrosa, and the final saga all kick off with a revolutionary figure leading a rebel army against God, with of course the Straw Hats later on joining in to help win the war. So with all of these clear, recurring parallels that Oda is drawing on beat for beat between the stories of Skypiea, Dressrosa, and the final saga, with the stories of Enel, Doflamingo, and Emu, down to their very specific actions and the remarkably similar storylines of the side characters of each arc, we can now look back again at the obviously deliberate parallels between the priests, the Seats, and the Gorosei. These three groups all play a clearly identical role with respect to their respective gods, and there are some very specific similarities in how the story of the priests and the Seats went that the Gorosei already seem to be playing out in the same manner. To begin with, Skypiea and Dressrosa each feature a war that began when Viper and the Shandians began their assault on God's army, and a war that began when Kiros and the Tontatas began their assault on Doflamingo's empire. In both of these wars, God and his subordinates are defeated, Enel and the priests in Skypiea, and Doflamingo and the Seats in Dressrosa. However, in both of these cases, with both groups, there is one subordinate that is defeated prior to the war. One subordinate who is tasked with dealing out punishment in some way at the beginning of the storyline as the Hammer of God. One subordinate who fails to enact God's punishment at the start. In Skypiea, this was Satori, who was meant to punish the Straw Hats for invading God's land, but was defeated. This was before the rebellion against Enel and the rest of the priests took place. Same thing with the Dressrosa storyline. When it's time for rebellion against Doflamingo, there are only 3 seats remaining. Why is that? Because Virgo was sent out in advance to punish Law and the Straw Hats on behalf of Doflamingo for causing trouble on Punk Hazard, essentially messing with God's turf. But of course, Virgo was also defeated, same as Satori was. In both storylines, in the prelude to the big war where the citizens rebel against God, one of God's subordinates is sent out early to punish the Straw Hats on God's behalf and is defeated. And now here we are in the final saga and we see the exact same thing. Again, the Straw Hats are causing trouble on God's turf, as Egghead Island belongs to the world government and the creations there are specifically for Emu and the Celestial Dragons. And so one of God's subordinates, Saturn, is being sent in to deal with the situation and punish the Straw Hats. And once again, we can expect that Saturn will be defeated, just like Satori, just like Virgo. One of God's subordinates will not make it to the big war. Just like Satori and Virgo, I don't think Saturn will be part of Emu's squad by the time the final battle begins. You can especially see a sharp parallel between Saturn and Virgo's storylines in particular, as Punk Hazard and Egghead Island are remarkably similar setups in the first place. Both are these islands of science centered around a mad genius, Caesar in Punk Hazard, Vegapunk in Egghead Island. On these islands are all these advanced secret developments taking place, making special creations, the Smile Fruit on Punk Hazard, the Seraphim and Mother Flames on Egghead Island. And these are being made for the god figures Doflamingo and Emu respectively. I mean, Punk Hazard itself literally set up Egghead Island in the future, as a lot of Punk Hazard is building up Vegapunk. The island is literally called Punk Hazard after Vegapunk. All along, Punk Hazard was supposed to be the first science island that we visit, and Egghead Island was supposed to be the final, more important science island that we visit. So in both cases, who is the primary antagonist of each arc? A subordinate sent by God to fix the trouble being caused by the Straw Hats, and to salvage the valuable scientific assets of the island. Doflamingo sends Virgo to Punk Hazard to take it back from the Straw Hats to make sure that Doflamingo can retain access to Smile. Emu sends Saturn to Egghead Island to take it back from the Straw Hats to make sure that Emu can retain access to the Mother Flame and the Seraphim. I mean, there's even an identical hostage situation in both, where the Straw Hats capture Caesar in Punk Hazard, who Doflamingo needs to make Smile, and the Straw Hats capture York in Egghead Island, who Emu needs to make Mother Flames. Saturn is playing the exact same role as Virgo did in Punk Hazard. So by the end of Egghead Island, I wouldn't be surprised if we are looking at Jupiter, Venus Juro, Topman, and Mars as Emu's only remaining subordinates, as I don't think Saturn makes it out alive from Egghead Island, the same way that Virgo didn't make it out alive from Dressrosa. And so if we continue down this train, here's another little oddity that may foreshadow a major plot development among the Gorosei, potentially a betrayal. On this specific point, I have to acknowledge that I am not the first person to recognize this, and I do not claim to be the first to recognize this. But many people have discussed how the number of Enel's priests is 4. Satori, Shura, Gedatsu, and Om. And the number of Doflamingo's seats is 4. Virgo, Diamante, Treble, and Pika. But the number of Emu's Gorosei is 5. Jupiter, Venus Juro, Topman, Mars, and Saturn. The three groups parallel each other in so many other ways, but in this one specific regard, they differ. Or do they? Could it be that the story of Emu and the Gorosei is actually going to parallel the story of Doflamingo and his seats even more specifically than we thought? Because Doflamingo actually did originally have 5 seats in total. The original 5 were Virgo, Diamante, Treble, Pika, and Corazon. Corazon was originally the heart seat, but the entire Dressrosa arc, the heart seat is missing. Why? Because Corazon rebelled. Corazon betrayed Doflamingo. Doflamingo, the god of Dressrosa, was supposed to have 5 trusted subordinates. He was supposed to have 5 elder stars, just like Emu, the god of the world. The parallel was originally exact. But one of Doflamingo's subordinates betrayed him. Is it possible that so too could we see a betrayal among the remaining Gorosei? Many have suggested that if one of them does betray Emu, it would be Jupiter, as he is the youngest of the group and seems the most different from the rest of the old men. In my own observation, that may be similar to how Corazon was the one who betrayed Doflamingo, as Corazon was the youngest of the group. In the Gorosei's case, the youngest being the traitor would be fitting, as Jupiter arguably could be from a different generation and may have grown up with a different outlook on things, as is often written with generational gaps. Now you might be asking, why was this traitor situation not the case in Skypiea with Enel's priests? Shouldn't Enel also have had 5 priests, one of whom betrays him? Well, the thing is, a lot of Oda's earlier storylines were simpler, and it's only as he repeats similar narrative frameworks that he adds more elements to make them more complex. At Skypiea, there likely wasn't room to fit a whole traitor-priest storyline in, as it was a shorter, tighter story in general. So perhaps that's why Enel was just given 4 actual loyal subordinates. And if we want to continue down this road of using the past to predict the future of the Gorosei, then we can actually potentially even guess at some of the key final matchups for the remaining Gorosei. If we say that Saturn is defeated here at Egghead Island before the final battle in the same way that Satori and Virgo were, and if we take a guess that, say, Jupiter may be a traitor just like Corazon was, then we are looking at 3 remaining Gorosei for the final battle. That's the same number of priests that Enel had in the war for Skypiea, and the same number of seats that Doflamingo had in the war for Dressrosa. And in both cases, one member of the remaining trio was defeated by Zoro, Om in Skypiea, and Pika in Dressrosa. With regards to the Gorosei, many already believe that Venus Juro is perfect for Zoro's matchup in the final war, as he wields what seems to be the final Kitetsu blade, marking him as not only a swordsman, but one who Zoro is potentially destined to defeat as another chosen wielder of a Kitetsu blade. Along those lines, who else tends to get a matchup against god subordinates in the past arcs of Skypiea and Dressrosa? The leader of the rebellion. Viper and Kyros are the analogous figures of Skypiea and Dressrosa, the head of the rebel forces in each arc respectively, who for decades have been planning in preparation for a great rebellion against God. Viper gets to defeat the priest Shura, and Kyros gets to defeat one of the seats, Diamante. So in that regard, I look to Dragon as the clear analog in the modern day, the head of the great rebel army of the modern world, the Revolutionary Army. And for decades, Dragon has been planning in preparation for a great rebellion against heaven, and he literally just declared the start of that rebellion to kick off this saga. As such, I think there is a very strong chance that Dragon gets one of the final two Gorosei, which would be fitting as we all expect Dragon to get some sort of a big win before the end of the story. If we really want to get speculative, then my feeling is that the Gorosei member Dragon would defeat might be Topman, simply because, first of all, he is the war god of justice, and that seems like perhaps the most thematically fitting one for Dragon to fight. Not to mention, Topman is often portrayed as being in the center of the Gorosei. And if you go back through and look at all of the Gorosei's appearances, Topman tends to get slightly more individual panels and dialogue than the rest, though this may be reading too much into it. As for the final matchup for the Gorosei, that's anyone's guess. There is no common thread across past arcs for who defeats God's fourth subordinate. The only commonality that I can see is that among both NL's priests and Doflamingo's seats, there was one member that was clearly a bit weaker than the rest, with Gedatsu having a literal 50% survival rate for his trial, and Treble being generally a bit of a joke. So I could see the final Gorosei going to anyone really. But let me know below who you think each of the Gorosei are going to fight, and if you enjoyed this video then definitely like and subscribe. And if you want to get my thoughts on some deeper parallels between the three groups, then you can listen to this Friday's podcast by supporting me on Patreon. Just hit the link in the description below.